Thank you, Jay, for the generous introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me, as well as a privilege to be part of this undertaking of the Disney Transformation Thursdays. Now, given the limited time, let me drive directly to my talk, which is titled Not As We Imagined It, Free Expression in the Digital Age. And my talk looks at the theoretical and conceptual frames for understanding the current digital landscape in relation to free expression. So I have three main points and a conclusion. So let me now open my share my screen rather for my PowerPoint presentation. Sorry, a bit more. This is not showing in my. Oh, here. All right, found it. Okay. So not as we imagine it, free expression in the digital age. Now, when you talk about digital landscapes, I think that we need to um, rethink our established doctrines on free expression. And you see, as we discussed, the landscape that has changed, the situation that has changed after the rise of social media. And going to my first point, we of course have this established constitutional doctrine, uh, which is from the classical liberal idea of giving constitutional and legal protections for free expression, but chiefly focused on individual rights. And these are framed as guarantees against encroachments by the state. And we understand that to be something that's right, found right in the heart of the Bill of Rights. So we have this constitutional understanding that free expression really is all about individual rights being protected from state excesses. And some of you might be familiar with this case, People versus Marty. It's actually not a free expression case, but it expresses what the Bill of Rights says when it comes to free expression. It says that the Bill of Rights is cast as an ironclad protection for personal autonomy against unwanted state encroachment. And this case borrows from the words of Constitutional Commissioner Joaquin Bernas when he explained before the commission that drafted the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, 1987 Constitution, why we have the Bill of Rights. And let me quote from his discussion here. And he says, in part, protection against whom? Protection against the state. The Bill of Rights governs the relationship between the individual and the state. Moreover, when you talk about free expression, it also rests upon this entire idea that the achievement of maximal protection for personal autonomy is anchored on a democratic deliberative process. So in this process, there is an assumption that the discussion is rational, and that rational discussion enables all citizens to arrive at the truth that they need for making important democratic decisions. And that design is something that's found in our own constitution. And the root of that design is actually in the case of Whitney versus California. And there's a very interesting and very eloquent passage there talking about the design of the US Constitution. And let me quote, the framers of the Constitution knew that order cannot be secured merely through fear of punishment or its infraction, that it is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination, that fear breeds repression, that repression breeds hate, that hate menaces stable government, that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed remedies, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsels is good ones. So you can see here that at the heart of the Constitution really is this idea of rational agents, of individuals who are informed in the discussion, and on the basis of that rational discussion and information that they get from the discussion, they are able to function as responsible citizens when they engage government, when they make decisions pertinent to government decisions. And so, if we talk therefore about the history, the history for the last 100 years, that is, if you talk about the 20th century, we have this model of regulation of free expression, where the state directly engages speakers. So through different methodologies of regulation, the state regulates the exercise of free expression of different speakers. So you have individuals, you have corporations, well, what we now call legacy media. You have institutions, labor unions, and the like, who exercise this freedom of expression. And according to the vision of the Bill of Rights, there's this wall that protects them in case the state overreaches, in case the state actually extends beyond what the law allows by way of regulation. And this is the model that courts have used in the US, in the Philippines to a great extent, developing a host of jurisprudence on time, manner, and place speech regulation. So let me now go to my second point. Okay. But all of that will, of course, change with the rise of big technology, the social media. When we talk about social media, we discuss here the ubiquity of big tech corporations like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, along with other infrastructures of new media. And let me point to three potentially shaping or distorting characteristics of these new media. And I think that you have some idea of this, at least by intuition. By intuition rather. The first is that we have this challenge of big technology, the challenge of big tech, YouTube, Facebook, the social media apparatuses to actually enable the speech of billions of people. This is a latest figures from Hootsuite. We are social, which is an organization that tracks the use of social media around the world. And you can see that right now there are 3.96 billion users of social media. And that's more than half, 51% of the world's total population. So consider, if you consider these figures, therefore, you can see the ubiquity of social media. And that is really happening at a fast rate, and it's increasing. The numbers are increasing as we speak. And this is actually enabled because we have this entire ecosystem of new media infrastructure. So that includes internet, satellite communication, ISPs, and all these other institutions that make social media possible. The second point is that big tech has such an extensive reach that even rivals, if not exceeds, that of states and international organizations. So if you consider that Facebook, for instance, you practically can find Facebook everywhere. Almost everyone in the Philippines has a Facebook account. The same goes for Twitter, maybe to a limited extent in the Philippines, but Twitter also has a huge territorial reach. You have YouTube. A lot of people are also on YouTube, and other social media networks. In China, they have their own social media systems, and they also straddle the lives of hundreds of billions of Chinese citizens. So you can see that, you can in fact say that social media companies have such tremendous economic, ideological, and informational power that poses challenges, unique challenges to states, not just the US, but the Philippines, practically every other state on the face of the earth, given this tremendous power that are enshrined or that rest in the hands of these social media companies, and most of them are, in fact, based in the US. And a third point that you must consider is the technological infrastructure that's required to make the big tech's operation possible on a day-to-day basis. What you see here is the increasing penetration of online and digital consumption as a result of COVID-19. So it's there's a leap in the consumption of people of different modes of social media. Now you have streaming services. Of course, people spend more time now on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, or even sending messages through Messenger, or they explore other mobile apps. And that's because of the free time that has been made possible by the pandemic. Of course, a lot of people are now working at home. They don't go that much now to their offices, given the lockdowns that have happened in the last few months. And uh, and all these activities, of course, of new media is founded on what scholars call surveillance capitalism. The and and this is the idea that uh, these companies need continuously to collect personal data for commodification. And the social media networks that we know, they have such an expansive and extensive infrastructure for collecting personal data that you will not find in any ordinary state. Maybe maybe they would be comparable to the intelligence activities or capabilities of the United States or maybe Russia. But on the whole, this kind of capacity you will not find in an ordinary state like the Philippines. And if you've seen this documentary Social Media, you know that the surveillance capitalism system is very addictive. Uh, the moment you wake up, open your Facebook, you look at what your friends post, and even before you sleep, you also check on your Facebook. So it's an addictive process where we cheerfully surrender personal data to Facebook, to Twitter, so that they can use it freely to earn money by way of advertising. So you really have these technical capabilities that dwarf those of states, and when you come to think of it, it's really scary. And now people talk about the Internet of Things, the integration of practically everything, so that you have all these integrated means of collecting personal data. And some philosophers are starting to talk about the idea of transhumanism, in which human beings will become increasingly identified with the data collected about them. And in fact, the next step towards that is the integration, of course, of flesh and information. So these three things that we see arising from the ubiquity or from the prevalence of social media in the life of a lot of people around the world, almost 4 billion now. Of course, these have intended and unintended consequences. And what are these? Well, there are 5 that I've listed. I'm sure there are more, but for purposes of our discussion, we'll just talk about 5. The first one is free speech by algorithm. So we thought before that it would enable free speech, but this data surveillance system is rigged such that certain people are lumped according to interests, and the feed that you see on your social media account on Facebook is based on data that had been collected by Facebook about you, the sites that you click, the people you interact with. And there's this famous quote from the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas, where he said that a post-truth democracy no longer be a democracy. He was actually writing from the year 2000 and So at the start, in the early 2000s, maybe late 1990s, the promise of new media was democratization and increased enlightenment for global citizens. But what happened is that what we have now, as Burmas noted, are bubbles where people are, stick to what they think is appropriate for them, where people think alike, and there's hardly any interaction between these different bubbles. Um, so this was actually the very first time the word post-truth was used in 2006, and Habermas was actually remarking on the remarkable phenomenon of the election of George W. Bush to the U.S. presidency in 2006, where he noted that for people, facticity or factuality really does not matter. What matters is that what they hear, what they imbibe from social media are things that reflect their own value system. And 14 years later, we have Donald Trump, we have QAnon, which is a very widespread conspiracy group now in different parts of the West, and emanated from the US. And we have what we now call the troll farms. Uh, um, well, a few years ago, someone made a Twitter account of Habermas. Is now more than 8 years old. It's actually someone else, and not the philosopher, but the guy who tweeted, who used Twitter, posted several statements lifting from another essay that he wrote, and in that essay he lamented the fragmentation of social and political life as a result of social media. The second unintended consequence is what I call death by speech, and we have seen its gruesome consequences in Myanmar, the genocide against the Rohingya people. And the allegation is that Facebook abetted a genocidal campaign that was launched by the Myanmar government against the Rohingyas. And Facebook was passive. It did not lift a finger to stop all these incitements posted on Facebook, as a result of which tens and thousands of people have allegedly been killed. And today, it's a matter of debate whether or not Facebook may be held liable in some way for what is considered by some as grave omission on its part, as a result of the use by certain interests in Myanmar of Facebook facilities to promote incitements to genocide. A third unintended consequences of the rise of social media, of course, is political manipulation. In the slide, you see the story about what Cambridge Analytica did in the Philippines that became some sort of a blueprint for the use of social media in the US also to influence elections. And we know now a lot about this because there was actually a whistleblower, somebody who was deeply embedded in Cambridge Analytica, and he exposed what was happening. And the model that Cambridge Analytica allegedly used in the Philippines became part of the playbook for Donald Trump's own presidential campaign. The fourth consequence is it's something that we constantly talk about, political polarization. So when you think about what's happening to us in the US, you're looking at the current count in the presidential elections. You see this huge divide between among Americans, and to some degree, a lot of experts, a lot of commentators attribute that really to the rise of social media and the bubbles that came along with it. Fifth is political interference. Now, recently, Facebook announced that it removed accounts targeting the Philippines from China. And they basically said that we have to remove these accounts because they exhibit coordinated inauthentic behavior of a foreign or governmental entity. And it's a real possibility, a reality today, that you will have these big governments interested in how the political life of another country would unfurl, and they can actually use social media to spread certain misinformation campaigns to influence political decisions being made in that other country. Um, and just recently, a group of scholars released the Oxford Statement on International Law that deals with protections against foreign electoral interference through digital means. So there's this recognition that states have an obligation, especially if they're the ones targeted, to stop these foreign political interference. So and before, in World War II, it was an expensive and very complex undertaking, for British agents, for instance, to influence um, American leaders to help Britain in its fight against the Nazis. They have to put up an office in the US to deal with politicians. Today, you don't even have to step on foreign shores. You just have to have a troll farm that you will use to spread disinformation or misinformation, for that matter, to influence political decisions being made in the target state. So now we have discussed about this rise of big technology in social media and their consequences, how they have changed the landscape, and what do we do then? Do we have recourse? What are the new doctrines of free expression that we can use? Let me discuss this a proposal by Professor Jack Balkin from Yale Law School, showing that free speech can no longer be explained in terms of the dyadic model that we discussed earlier. So we now have this triangular model of free expression. On one side, you have nation states. The dyad earlier, with dealing with end users, citizens, civil society, and legacy media and the like. And on the other side, you have these new media infrastructures that make social media possible. Platforms, the ISPs, domain name systems, of course, payment systems. No? When you have your paid account, you have to pay through credit cards, and all these credit card and payment companies, PayPal, they enabled, in fact, this entire ecosystem, because without them, you cannot derive any profit from end users. So there's this interaction, the co-optation. Sometimes the state would co-opt, or sometimes the corporations would say that it's to their interest to cooperate with the state. So there's always that the dialectical relationship in this triangular relationships between these three factors in this triangular model for expression, and we will look in detail at how at their dynamics. So before, you have this regulation directly. If you have a newspaper publishing stuff, this will go directly to the legacy media. But today, dealing with social media, before legacy media is still there, we still have newspapers. But then you have Facebook, you have YouTube, so you have these states and international bodies going after the intermediary who enable your Instagrammer, your blogger, or your Facebook poster, or your Twitter. So there's this additional aspect that's not accounted for by traditional media. So for instance, you now have this entire infrastructure in social media companies doing private administrative prior restraint. So we know that in the Philippines, we play a large part in censoring all these gruesome, inhuman photos uploaded every day on Facebook. When I was attending the discussions with the Facebook regional office on their external board, we were told that on any given day, up to 200 million pictures are uploaded on Facebook around the world. Can you imagine that? No? So you need an army of people, aside from the algorithm, to sift through the chaos of the 200 billion photos, and to see if any photo violates the community standards of Facebook. So now they have this oversight board that I think it started operating a few months ago, but it's been criticized for doing too little, too late. No? So there's also this a group that says that calls themselves actually the real Facebook Oversight Board, criticizing Facebook because it didn't really deliver as promised. There was a lot of discussion when they were talking about establishing the Oversight Board, but the Oversight Board finally came to be. A lot of people were disappointed by the powers that Facebook actually gave to the Oversight Board. But the point is that you really have this something analogous to your administrative prior restraint procedure in government, no? Except that this is private governance. It's a private company setting up its own system. So, for example, Google, when faced with a suit enforcing the right to be forgotten, the European Court of Justice said, well, you need to put up now this system. So when somebody complains, you decide if the person complaining does not agree with what you did with this request, he can go to court. So there's now some sort of a private administrative exhaustion, no? Requirement before you can go to court, and that's now set in Google. So this is an example of private governance occasioned by the rise of social media, given the amount of information, of personal data being amassed by these social media networks. And you therefore ask, what will be the parameters? Facebook has its standards, but how are we sure that they're doing what they should? What about free expression? What about the public interest that goes into all these posts? One course of standards is what has been called the Manila Principles on Intermediary Liability, and this was actually drafted in 2015 on the occasion of the RightsCon. It is an annual gathering of people interested in rights, free expression, information, and they drafted these principles. What's common about these principles is that they actually look at what Professor Balkin calls curatorial due process and fiduciary and information fiduciaries. So there's now this notion of curatorial due process, because what's being removed or blocked is free expression, and there's an expectation that the curators, so those people exercising private administrative prior restraint of some kind, they embody in some way the public interest that goes with all these posts being made on their social media sites. So given this, therefore, we need to expand our understanding of rights. No? So if we just limit ourselves to free expression, to the Bill of Rights understanding of free expression, then we're limited to the encroachment of state. And we saw in this model that already social media networks are in some way practicing some sort of censorship, what's called collateral censorship, or private administrative prior restraint. And the question therefore for us, in our own system, do we have something that we can also use to understand better this dynamic? So in our own constitution, outside of the Bill of Rights, we actually have these several procedures in the constitution. I'm just going to flash them quickly. These are provisions of the constitution dealing with the right to information, balanced information, and it also in fact mentions free speech and free expression. There's also the policy on the development of communication procedures and institutions that respect free speech, and that goes into what we want as a people, our aspirational goals as a people. There's the provision that prohibits monopolies, and we now have a competition commission, which is one of the operationalizations of this provision. And this really deal with the problem of sociality. If you only look at the Bill of Rights, it's just individual rights, and we have to think about institutional and communal rights that are in fact independent also of individual rights. we also have to say and to consider that structural and institutional rights are a value in themselves. So if you talk about free expression, therefore, we can actually have a better appreciation of its flourishing within a constitutional framework where we can find not only structural pluralism, but also viewpoint pluralism. What about our jurisprudence? So earlier, we saw that jurisprudence is quite limited to individual rights. No? But we have this case of Bagares versus Comelec, which actually expands that to a great extent. So on the one hand, you have, according to the ponente here, Justice Leonen, it's connected to the right of the people to participate in public affairs, including criticisms of government actions. It also goes into the marketplace of ideas. So you see there the American case that we talked about earlier, the constitutional design of rational discussion, and then the individual autonomy, self-expression that enhances human dignity. And then there's this discussion of markers for group identity. So it's not just, free expression is not just for individual rights, but even for communal, for group rights. And finally, it also protects individuals and minorities against majoritarian abuses. Because if you only consider democracy as, majority of 50+1, then you have the potential for a totalitarian system. So free expression, according to Bacolod, to the Bacolod case, is also a protection against majoritarian abuses. Then there's also this case, landmark case, in the name of Professor J.J. Dicini, with respect to cybercrime regulation. This is in terms of expanded actual malice test for cyber libel. So even if, according to this case, it's actually not often considered that in this case, there's actually a ruling by the court that even if a journalist is grossly or extremely negligent, it cannot automatically be inferred that that journalist is guilty of actual malice. So that can be used as a defense in criminal libel. Of course, in this case, it was also held in the court that there's no intermediary liability for cyber libel if you're just retweeting or sharing or reacting to a post that was later on adjudged to be libelous. And then you have the section in the court's decision that invalidated the takedown clause and the real-time data collection clauses as unconstitutional without court warrants. No? And these are really important. These are landmark holdings of the court in this case, and that deals with digital rights, with our digital life. And in closing, I would like to end with this quote from the philosopher Urjan Habermas, that talks about the continuing challenge that we have in social media. And I'll just quote the last line, but the rise of millions of, he's talking here about all these possible positions that can be taken. As many as you have social media users, they have led to the fragmentation of audiences into all these isolated bubbles. And that's really the continuing challenge for us. How we should be able to bridge the gap, given the promise of social media and the reality that we have. And we see that being played out in stark reality as we look at the news of the presidential vote count in the United States. Thank you and good afternoon.